The clock on the wall showed 6:15 p.m. when Detective Marcus Williams finally pushed back his chair from his desk. The Denver Police Department was still busy with evening shift officers preparing for patrol, but Marcus was done for the day. He had spent the last 8 hours writing reports about a drug case that had taken him 3 weeks to solve. Marcus was tired. His back hurt from sitting too long, and his eyes were sore from staring at computer screens all day. At 32 years old, he had been a police officer for 9 years. The last 3 years he worked undercover in the narcotics division. This meant he dressed like a regular person and tried to catch drug dealers without them knowing he was a cop. He looked around the office one more time to make sure he had not forgotten anything important. His desk was clean and organized just the way he liked it. Marcus picked up his keys and wallet from the drawer and headed toward the parking garage. Marcus drove a silver Honda Accord that looked like any other car on the road. The police department gave him this car because it did not look like a police car. There were no special lights or police markings on it. This was perfect for his undercover work because criminals would never suspect he was a cop just by looking at his car. As he walked through the parking garage, Marcus thought about dinner. He was hungry and did not want to cook when he got home. His apartment was small and he lived alone. Cooking for one person always seemed like too much work after a long day at the office. Marcus decided to go to Joe's Diner on the east side of Denver. He had been eating there for 2 years and knew the staff well. The food was good and cheap, and they made the best apple pie in the city. The diner was about 15 minutes away from the police station, which gave him time to relax and forget about work for a while. He got into his car and started the engine. The radio was playing a country song that he liked, so he turned up the volume a little bit. Marcus enjoyed country music because it reminded him of growing up in rural Colorado with his parents and 2 sisters. As he drove through downtown Denver, Marcus noticed how busy the streets were. People were walking on sidewalks, going to restaurants, or heading home from work. The city always seemed alive in the evening, especially during summer when the weather was nice and people wanted to be outside. Marcus had grown up in a small town called Hayden, about 3 hours north of Denver. When he was 18, he moved to the big city to go to college. He studied criminal justice at the University of Colorado and always knew he wanted to be a police officer. His father had been a sheriff in their small town for 25 years, and Marcus wanted to follow in his footsteps. The drive to Joe's Diner took Marcus through several different neighborhoods. He passed by the business district where tall office buildings reached toward the sky. Then he drove through a residential area with small houses and tree-lined streets. Finally, he reached the east side of Denver where the diner was located. This part of the city was not as fancy as downtown, but Marcus liked it better. The people here were working families trying to make a living and take care of their children. It reminded him more of his hometown where everyone knew everyone else and people helped each other when times were tough. Marcus had been working on a difficult case for the past month. He was trying to catch a group of drug dealers who were selling drugs near schools. This made him angry because children were in danger. The case required him to pretend to be a drug buyer, which meant spending time with dangerous criminals and acting like someone he was not. Undercover work was stressful because Marcus always had to be careful not to blow his cover. If the criminals found out he was a police officer, they might try to hurt him or disappear before he could arrest them. He had to remember his fake name, his fake job, and his fake story about why he wanted to buy drugs. The hardest part of his job was that he could not tell most people what he really did for work. When he met new people, he had to lie and say he worked in construction or sales. Only his family and closest friends knew he was an undercover police officer. Marcus turned onto Colfax Avenue, one of the longest and busiest streets in Denver. The traffic was heavy because it was rush hour and everyone was trying to get somewhere. He did not mind the traffic because it gave him more time to listen to music and think about things other than work. As he drove, Marcus thought about his plans for the weekend. His sister Emma was coming to visit from Colorado Springs with her 2 children. Marcus loved being an uncle and enjoyed taking his nephew and niece to the park or to see movies. They always asked him to tell them stories about catching bad guys, but he had to be careful not to scare them with details about dangerous criminals. The traffic light ahead turned yellow, so Marcus slowed down and stopped. He looked around at the other cars and noticed a blue pickup truck parked in a lot nearby. 3 men were standing near the truck, but Marcus did not pay much attention to them. In his line of work, he had learned to notice unusual things, but these men just looked like they were having a conversation. Marcus was wearing blue jeans and a gray t-shirt under a light jacket. He looked like any other person driving home from work. His police badge was clipped to his belt under his jacket, and his service weapon was in a shoulder holster that could not be seen. To anyone watching, he was just another regular guy in regular clothes driving a regular car. The light turned green and Marcus continued toward the diner. He was looking forward to sitting in his favorite booth, ordering a cheeseburger and fries and reading the newspaper while he ate. It would be a quiet, peaceful end to a busy day. Marcus had no idea that in less than 3 hours his quiet evening would turn into one of the most dangerous moments of his career. The 3 men by the blue pickup truck had been watching cars and drivers all week looking for their next target. They had no way of knowing that the tired-looking man in the silver Honda Accord was one of Denver's most experienced undercover police officers. 3 blocks away from where Marcus was driving, Tommy Rodriguez sat in the passenger seat of a stolen blue pickup truck. He was nervous and kept checking his watch every few minutes. The sun was setting, and the sky was turning orange and pink. This was the time they had planned to make their move. Tommy was 24 years old and had been in trouble with the law since he was 16. He grew up in a rough neighborhood where many young men turned to crime because they could not find good jobs. Tommy had dropped out of high school and spent 2 years in prison for stealing cars. He got out 6 months ago and promised his mother he would stay out of trouble, but finding honest work was harder than he expected. Sitting behind the wheel was Jake Patterson, a 22-year-old with shaky hands and a nervous laugh. Jake was the youngest of the 3 men and the most scared. This would only be his 3rd time robbing someone at gunpoint. He kept telling himself he was doing this to help his sick grandmother pay for her medicine, but deep down, he knew there had to be a better way. Jake had met Tommy in county jail the year before when they were both waiting for their court dates. They became friends because they were both scared and neither of them had done anything this serious before. Jake was in jail for stealing from a store, and Tommy was there for car theft. They promised each other they would go straight when they got out, but that promise did not last long. The 3rd man was Steve Mitchell, who was standing outside the truck smoking a cigarette. Steve was 26 and the most experienced criminal of the group. He had been in and out of prison since he was 18 and knew how to plan robberies. Steve was the one who came up with the idea to steal cars at traffic lights because he said it was easier than breaking into houses or robbing stores. Steve had a scar on his left cheek from a knife fight in prison and tattoos covering both of his arms. He was not afraid of getting caught because he had been caught many times before. Steve told the other 2 men that stealing cars was easy money and that rich people had insurance anyway, so nobody really got hurt. The 3 men had been watching this intersection for 5 days. They learned that between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m., many cars stopped at the red light and drivers were usually alone. Most people were tired from work and not paying attention to what was happening around them. This made them perfect targets. Their plan was simple. When a good car stopped at the red light, Tommy and Jake would approach from both sides while Steve watched for police cars or anyone who might try to help the driver. They would demand the keys, take the car, and drive to a chop shop where someone would pay them cash and cut up the car so it could never be identified. Steve threw his cigarette on the ground and walked back to the truck. "Okay, guys, it's time," he said in a low voice. "Remember what we talked about. Get in fast, get the keys, and get out. Don't hurt anybody unless you have to, and don't take any chances." Tommy checked his gun one more time. It was an old revolver that Steve had given him. Tommy had never shot anyone before, and hoped he would not have to start tonight. Jake did not have a gun, but he carried a large knife in his jacket pocket just in case. The 3 men had stolen the blue pickup truck 2 days earlier from a parking lot outside a shopping mall. They chose it because it was old and common, so it would not attract attention. Steve had hot-wired the engine in less than 3 minutes, which impressed the other 2 men. As they waited for the right target, Jake thought about his grandmother who was dying of cancer. She needed expensive medicine that their family could not afford. Jake had tried to get a job at several places, but nobody wanted to hire someone with a criminal record. He told himself that stealing one car could pay for months of medicine and maybe save his grandmother's life. Tommy was thinking about his girlfriend Maria and their baby daughter Sophia. Maria worked 2 jobs, but they still could not pay rent on their apartment. The landlord had threatened to throw them out if they did not pay what they owed by the end of the week. Tommy figured one stolen car could solve all their problems. Steve was not thinking about helping anyone. He just wanted easy money so he could buy drugs and alcohol. Steve had been using drugs since he was 15 and could not hold a regular job because of his addiction. Crime was the only way he knew how to make money. At 9:45 p.m., the traffic light turned red, and several cars lined up waiting for it to change. Most of the drivers looked tired and were staring straight ahead or looking at their phones. This was exactly what the 3 men had been waiting for. Then they saw Marcus Williams pull up in his silver Honda Accord. The car looked new and expensive, exactly the type of vehicle they were looking for. Marcus was alone and appeared to be checking his phone, which meant he was distracted and not watching his surroundings. "That's the one," Steve whispered. "Silver Honda, drivers alone and not paying attention. Perfect." Tommy felt his heart start beating faster. His hands were sweating and he could feel the weight of the gun in his jacket pocket. Jake took a deep breath and tried to calm his nerves. They had practiced this scenario many times, but doing it for real was completely different. Steve gave the signal and Tommy and Jake started walking toward Marcus's car from opposite directions. Steve moved to a position where he could see everything and warn them if any police cars appeared. None of them knew they were about to make the biggest mistake of their criminal careers. The 3 men had no idea that the tired-looking man in the silver Honda was Detective Marcus Williams, one of the most experienced undercover police officers in Denver. They thought they had found an easy target, but they were about to discover just how wrong they were. Marcus was looking at his phone when he heard a tapping sound on his passenger window. The sound was sharp and metallic, like someone hitting the glass with a coin or a key. He looked up from his phone and saw a young man in a baseball cap standing next to his car. The man was holding something dark in his hand, but Marcus could not see what it was because of the streetlight glare on the window. At first, Marcus thought the man might need directions or help with something. People often approached his car at traffic lights to ask for money or directions, but something felt wrong about this situation. The man was standing too close to the car, and his posture looked tense and aggressive. Then Marcus saw what the man was holding. It was a gun, and it was pointed directly at him through the glass. Marcus felt his stomach drop and his training immediately kicked in. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different because he was caught completely off guard. Tommy Rodriguez was the man with the gun. His hands were shaking slightly as he pointed the weapon at Marcus through the window. Tommy had practiced this moment many times in his head, but actually doing it was much scarier than he had imagined. The gun felt heavy in his hand and he could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool evening air. Tommy tapped on the window again, harder this time. He wanted Marcus to roll down the window so he could give him instructions. Tommy had been told by Steve to keep everything simple and quick. Get the keys, take the car, and leave. No complications and no extra talking. Marcus looked around quickly to see if there were other attackers. His years of police training had taught him that criminals usually worked in groups. He spotted Jake Patterson approaching the driver's side door. Jake was trying to look tough, but Marcus could tell he was nervous by the way he kept looking around and fidgeting with something in his jacket pocket. Jake reached Marcus's door and started pulling on the handle, but the car was locked. He knocked on the window with his knuckle and shouted something that Marcus could not hear clearly through the glass. Jake looked young and scared, which made Marcus think this might be one of his first times committing this type of crime. Marcus quickly scanned the area for the 3rd man. Because criminals almost always worked in teams of 3, he spotted Steve Mitchell standing about 50 feet away near the blue pickup truck. Steve was watching the street for police cars and keeping an eye on the other traffic to make sure no one was paying attention to what was happening. The traffic light was still red, but Marcus knew it would change soon. Other cars were lined up behind him and next to him, but most of the other drivers were looking at their phones or straight ahead. No one seemed to notice that a crime was happening right next to them. Marcus had several options, but all of them were risky. He could try to drive away, but the men might shoot at his car or at other innocent people. He could try to get out and fight, but he was outnumbered, and they were expecting trouble. He could also try to talk his way out of the situation, but armed robbers were usually too nervous to listen to reason. Tommy was getting impatient because Marcus had not rolled down his window yet. He tapped the gun against the glass harder and shouted, "Open the window now!" His voice was muffled by the glass, but Marcus could understand what he was saying. Jake was pulling harder on the door handle and looking more frustrated. He took out a knife from his jacket and showed it to Marcus through the window. The knife had a long blade that reflected the streetlights. Jake pointed at the door locks and made a gesture that meant Marcus should unlock the car. Marcus knew he had to make a decision quickly. The longer this situation continued, the more dangerous it would become. Nervous criminals with weapons were unpredictable and might do something stupid if they got scared or angry. Marcus decided to comply with their demands for now while he looked for an opportunity to turn the situation around. He slowly reached for the window control and rolled down the passenger window just a few inches. This allowed him to hear what Tommy was saying without giving the men full access to the inside of his car. "Get out of the car right now," Tommy shouted through the small opening in the window. His voice was high and shaky, which confirmed to Marcus that this young man was very nervous. "Put the keys in your hand and get out slowly. Don't try anything stupid or you'll get hurt." Marcus could smell cigarette smoke and alcohol on Tommy's breath, which meant the man had been drinking. This made the situation even more dangerous, because alcohol made people do things they would not normally do. Drunk criminals were more likely to panic and start shooting. Jake was hitting the driver's side window with the handle of his knife. The glass was strong and did not break, but the loud banging sound was attracting attention from other drivers. Marcus could see people in nearby cars starting to look in his direction. "Unlock the doors," Jake yelled. "We just want the car. Give us the keys and nobody gets hurt." Jake's voice was younger than Tommy's, and he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as Marcus. Steve Mitchell was getting nervous because the robbery was taking too long. He had told Tommy and Jake that they should be in and out within 30 seconds. It had already been almost a minute and they still did not have the keys. Steve started walking closer to Marcus's car to see what was causing the delay. The traffic light was about to change from red to green. Marcus could see the cross-traffic light had just turned yellow, which meant his light would be green in a few seconds. The cars behind him would start honking their horns if he did not move when the light changed. Marcus made eye contact with Tommy through the small gap in the window. "Okay," he said in a calm voice. "I'll get out. Just stay calm and don't hurt anyone." Marcus wanted to keep the men as relaxed as possible while he figured out his next move. Tommy felt a little relieved that Marcus was cooperating. Maybe this would be easier than he had thought. But he kept the gun pointed at Marcus because Steve had told him never to trust anyone during a robbery. People might try to be heroes and fight back when they got the chance. Marcus slowly reached for his keys with his right hand while his left hand moved toward the door handle. But he was also reaching for something else that Tommy could not see. Hidden under his jacket was his police badge and his service weapon. Marcus was getting ready to change from victim to police officer, and Tommy had no idea what was about to happen. Marcus slowly opened his car door while keeping his hands where Tommy and Jake could see them. The evening air felt cool against his face as he stepped out of the silver Honda. His heart was beating fast, but his mind was clear and focused. Years of police training had prepared him for situations exactly like this one. As Marcus stood up from the driver's seat, his light jacket shifted slightly to one side. The movement was small and natural, but it was enough to reveal something that changed everything. Clipped to his belt, clearly visible now, was a gold police badge that caught the light from the street lamp above. Jake Patterson was the first one to notice it. His eyes went wide with shock and fear when he saw the badge. Jake had been in jail before and knew exactly what a police badge looked like. For a moment, he could not believe what he was seeing. They had picked the worst possible target for their crime. "Oh no, man," Jake whispered to Tommy, his voice full of panic. "Look at his belt. He's a cop. He's a police officer." Jake's hands started shaking so badly that he almost dropped his knife. All the confidence he had been trying to build up disappeared in an instant. Tommy heard what Jake said but could not process it at first. He looked down at Marcus's belt and saw the badge gleaming in the light. Tommy felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Of all the cars they could have chosen, they had picked a police officer. This was the worst luck possible. Steve Mitchell was still standing by the pickup truck when he heard Jake's panicked voice. He could not hear exactly what Jake was saying, but he could tell something had gone very wrong. Steve started walking quickly toward Marcus's car to see what was happening. Marcus saw the recognition in their eyes and knew his cover was blown. There was no point in pretending to be a regular citizen anymore. He stood up straighter and let his jacket fall open so they could see his badge and weapon clearly. His voice became firm and authoritative. "Denver Police Department," Marcus announced, loudly and clearly. "You are both under arrest. Put your weapons down immediately and place your hands behind your heads." Tommy's mind was racing. He still had his gun pointed at Marcus, but now he knew he was pointing it at a police officer. That made this crime much more serious. Attacking a police officer carried a much longer prison sentence than just stealing a car from a regular person. Jake took several steps backward away from the car. He was breathing hard and looking around desperately for an escape route. Jake had promised his grandmother that he would never go back to jail, and now he was facing the possibility of many years in prison for trying to rob a police officer. Marcus kept his hands visible but ready to draw his service weapon if necessary. He could see that both men were scared and confused, which made them unpredictable. Scared criminals with weapons sometimes made bad decisions that got people hurt. "I know this looks bad," Marcus said in a calm voice, "but nobody has to get hurt here. Just put your weapons down and we can work this out." Marcus was trying to de-escalate the situation, but he was also ready to defend himself if either man tried to attack. Tommy was sweating heavily now. The gun felt impossibly heavy in his hand. He had never pointed a weapon at a police officer before, and he knew that crossing that line would change his life forever. But he also knew that running away might be his only chance to avoid spending the next 20 years in prison. Steve finally reached the car and saw what was happening. When he saw Marcus's badge and heard him identify himself as a police officer, Steve immediately knew they had to get out of there fast. Steve had been arrested many times and knew that assaulting a police officer was one of the most serious crimes someone could commit. "Tommy! Jake!" Steve shouted. "We have to go right now." Steve was already backing away toward the pickup truck. He was not going to stick around and get arrested again, especially not for something this serious. The traffic light had turned green, and cars behind Marcus were starting to honk their horns. Some drivers were getting out of their cars to see what was causing the delay. This meant more witnesses and more people who might call for backup police officers. Marcus could hear sirens in the distance, which meant other police officers were already on their way. Marcus always carried a small emergency radio, and he had activated it when he first saw the gun. The signal automatically alerted the police dispatcher that an officer needed help. Tommy realized he had to make a choice. He could either surrender now or try to escape and spend the rest of his life running from the police. Either way, his life as he knew it was over. The simple plan to steal a car and make some quick money had turned into the biggest mistake of his life. Jake was crying now. He thought about his sick grandmother who was depending on him to help pay for her medicine. He thought about his mother who had worked so hard to keep him out of trouble. All of that was going to be destroyed because he had made one terrible decision. Marcus could see the internal struggle in both men's faces. He had arrested many criminals over the years and knew that this was the moment when they either gave up or tried something desperate. The next few seconds would determine whether anyone got hurt. "You still have a chance to do the right thing," Marcus told them. "Put the weapons down and surrender. Don't make this worse than it already is." Tommy looked at Jake, then at Steve, who was almost back to the pickup truck. The sirens were getting louder, which meant the police would be there soon. Tommy had to decide right now what he was going to do with the gun in his hand. Tommy Rodriguez stood frozen in the middle of the street with his gun still pointed at Marcus. Time seemed to move very slowly as he tried to figure out what to do next. His whole body was shaking and sweat was running down his face even though the evening air was cool. The sirens were getting much louder now. Tommy could see flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the buildings around them. The police backup that Marcus had called for was almost there, and Tommy knew he only had a few seconds to make his decision. Steve Mitchell had reached the blue pickup truck and was shouting at Tommy and Jake to run. "Come on," Steve yelled as he jumped into the driver's seat. "We have to get out of here right now." Steve started the engine and was ready to drive away with or without his partners. Jake Patterson was still standing near Marcus's car, but he was backing away slowly. Jake's mind was racing with thoughts of his grandmother, his mother, and the life he would lose if he went to prison. The knife in his hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Marcus watched both men carefully and tried to predict what they would do next. His right hand was near his service weapon, but he had not drawn it yet. Marcus hoped he could end this situation without anyone getting shot, but he was ready to defend himself if necessary. "Tommy," Marcus said, using the young man's name even, though they had never been introduced. Marcus had recognized Tommy from police files and wanted to personalize the situation. "I know you're scared, but think about what you're doing. You haven't hurt anyone yet. You can still walk away from this." Tommy was surprised that the police officer knew his name. This made him realize that the police probably already knew who he was and had been watching him. Maybe they had been planning to arrest him anyway, even without this robbery attempt. More police cars were arriving at the intersection. Tommy could see at least 3 patrol cars with their lights flashing, and more were coming. Police officers were getting out of their cars and taking positions around the area. Tommy realized that escape was becoming impossible. Jake made his decision first. He dropped his knife on the ground and fell to his knees with his hands raised above his head. "I give up," Jake shouted. "Don't shoot me. I surrender." Jake was crying and shaking as he knelt on the asphalt. Marcus felt relieved that one of the men had given up without fighting. "That's good, Jake," Marcus said calmly. "Stay right there and keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus knew that getting one suspect to surrender peacefully would help convince the other one to do the same thing. Tommy saw Jake surrender and realized how serious the situation had become. There were now at least 6 police officers at the scene, and more were arriving every minute. Tommy was completely surrounded with no way to escape. Steve Mitchell saw that Tommy and Jake were about to be arrested and decided to save himself. He put the pickup truck in gear and drove away as fast as he could, leaving his partners behind. Steve figured that if he could get away now, he might be able to leave town and start over somewhere else. The police officers who had just arrived saw Steve driving away and immediately radioed his description to other units. Within minutes, police cars throughout the city were looking for the blue pickup truck and its driver. Marcus could see that Tommy was starting to realize his situation was hopeless. The young man's gun hand was shaking badly, and his eyes were darting back and forth between Marcus and the other police officers. Marcus knew this was the most dangerous moment because desperate people sometimes did desperate things. "Tommy, look at me," Marcus said in a calm, steady voice. "You're surrounded and there's nowhere to go. But nobody has been hurt yet, and that's what matters most. Put the gun down and this can all be over peacefully." Tommy thought about his girlfriend Maria and their baby daughter Sophia. If he went to prison for a long time, he would miss watching his daughter grow up. She would be an adult by the time he got out, and she might not even remember him. The other police officers had their weapons drawn, but they were waiting for Marcus to handle the situation since he was the primary officer involved. They trusted Marcus's experience and knew that he had successfully talked many suspects into surrendering without violence. Tommy's arm was getting tired from holding the gun up for so long. His hand was cramping and he was having trouble keeping the weapon steady. Tommy realized that even if he wanted to use the gun, he was shaking too badly to aim it properly. "I don't want to go back to prison," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "I just got out 6 months ago and I can't do it again. My girlfriend and my baby need me." Marcus could hear the pain and fear in Tommy's voice. He had heard similar stories from many criminals over the years. Most of them had started committing crimes because they thought they had no other choice. But crime always made their problems worse instead of better. "I understand," Marcus replied. "But shooting a police officer will guarantee you spend the rest of your life in prison. Right now, you still have a chance for a shorter sentence. Think about your family and do the right thing." Tommy looked around at all the police officers and patrol cars surrounding him. He thought about his daughter Sophia, who was only 8 months old. If he went to prison for 20 or 30 years, she would grow up without a father. If he got killed in a shootout with police, she would never see him again at all. Tommy's shoulders sagged as the fight went out of him. He was tired, scared, and out of options. Slowly, very slowly, he began to lower his gun toward the ground. Marcus held his breath as he watched Tommy's movements. This was the moment when the situation would either end peacefully or turn violent. Everything depended on what Tommy did in the next few seconds. Tommy placed his gun on the ground and stepped away from it with his hands raised. "I give up," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him as he saw the gun on the ground. The immediate danger was over, and nobody had been hurt. Now he could focus on securing the suspects and making sure the scene was safe. Marcus quickly moved forward and kicked Tommy's gun away from where he was kneeling. 2 other police officers immediately moved in to handcuff both Tommy Rodriguez and Jake Patterson. The suspects were searched for additional weapons and then placed in separate patrol cars. The intersection was now filled with police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks. Emergency responders had arrived in case anyone had been injured during the attempted robbery. Police officers were directing traffic around the scene and interviewing witnesses who had seen what happened. Marcus gave his initial statement to his supervisor, Lieutenant Sarah Davis, who had arrived to take charge of the investigation. Marcus explained how he'd been driving to dinner when the 3 men approached his car with weapons and demanded his keys. "You handled that very well," Lieutenant Davis told Marcus. "Your quick thinking and calm approach probably prevented someone from getting shot tonight." She was impressed by how Marcus had managed to talk both suspects into surrendering without using force. Meanwhile, other police officers were searching for Steve Mitchell and the stolen blue pickup truck. Steve had made it about 6 blocks from the scene before his luck ran out. The truck ran out of gas at a red light, and Steve tried to run away on foot. He was caught 3 minutes later hiding behind a dumpster in an alley. When Steve was arrested, he immediately started blaming Tommy and Jake for the failed robbery. "It was their idea," Steve shouted as police officers put handcuffs on him. "I told them this was a stupid plan, but they wouldn't listen to me." Back at the police station, Marcus spent the next 4 hours writing detailed reports about everything that had happened. He had to describe the entire incident from the moment he first saw Tommy approaching his car until both suspects were in handcuffs. During their interrogation, Jake Patterson broke down and confessed to everything. He told detectives about all the planning they had done and admitted that this was not their first robbery attempt. Jake also provided information about other crimes the 3 men had committed together. "I'm sorry," Jake cried during his interview. "My grandmother is dying and I thought this was the only way to get money for her medicine. I know that doesn't make it right, but I didn't know what else to do." Tommy Rodriguez was less cooperative during his interview. He admitted to pointing a gun at Marcus but claimed it was not loaded and that he never intended to hurt anyone. However, when police tested the gun, they found that it was fully loaded with 6 bullets. Steve Mitchell refused to answer any questions and demanded to speak with a lawyer. He had been arrested so many times that he knew exactly what to say and what not to say during police questioning. The investigation revealed that the 3 men had been responsible for 8 other carjackings over the past 2 months. Their victims included a college student, 2 elderly couples, a single mother with children in her car, and several business people driving home from work. Detective Lisa Wong was assigned to investigate the other robberies. She interviewed all the previous victims and found that the 3 suspects had used the same method each time. They would approach cars at traffic lights, threaten the drivers with weapons, and steal their vehicles. One of the previous victims was an elderly man named Robert Chen, who had been driving his wife to the hospital for a medical appointment. Tommy and Jake had stolen their car and left them stranded on a busy street. Robert's wife had to wait an extra 2 hours for her treatment because of the robbery. Another victim was a young mother named Ashley Williams, who had been driving home from picking up her children from daycare. The 3 men had forced her out of her car, while her 2 young children were crying in the back seat. Ashley was so traumatized by the experience that she was still afraid to drive alone at night. The district attorney, Michael Thompson, decided to charge all three men with multiple felonies. The charges included armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, car theft, and conspiracy to commit robbery. Because Marcus was a police officer, additional charges were added for assaulting a law enforcement officer. Tommy Rodriguez's girlfriend, Maria, came to visit him in jail while he was waiting for his trial. She brought their baby daughter Sophia, who was now 9 months old. Maria was angry and hurt that Tommy had broken his promise to stay out of trouble. "How could you do this to us?" Maria asked Tommy during their conversation in the jail visiting room. "You promised me you were done with crime. Now our daughter is going to grow up without her father." Tommy tried to explain that he had only been trying to get money to help their family, but Maria was too upset to listen. She told him that she was moving back to live with her parents in another state, and that she didn't know if she would bring Sophia to visit him in prison. Jake Patterson's mother and grandmother also came to visit him in jail. His grandmother was very sick and could barely walk, but she wanted to see her grandson one more time before his trial. Jake felt terrible knowing that he had made his grandmother's life even more difficult during her final months. "I'm disappointed in you, Jake," his grandmother said weakly. "I taught you better than this. There are always legal ways to solve problems even when things seem hopeless." The trial took place 4 months later. All three men decided to accept plea bargains instead of going through a full trial. Their lawyers had told them that the evidence against them was very strong and that a jury would probably find them guilty of all charges. Tommy Rodriguez was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge said the sentence was harsh because Tommy had pointed a loaded gun at a police officer and had been involved in multiple robberies that terrorized innocent people. Jake Patterson received a 12-year sentence because he had cooperated with the police investigation and had shown genuine remorse for his crimes. The judge also considered that Jake had been trying to help his sick grandmother, even though his methods were completely wrong. Steve Mitchell got the longest sentence of 18 years because he had the worst criminal record and had been the leader of the group. The judge said that Steve had corrupted 2 younger men and had shown no remorse for hurting innocent victims. Detective Marcus Williams was commended by the police department for his professional handling of a dangerous situation. He received a medal for bravery, and his case became a training example for other officers about how to de-escalate armed confrontations. Marcus continued working undercover narcotics cases, but he never forgot the night when 3 desperate men almost changed his life forever. The incident reminded him that police officers were always potential targets, even when they were off duty and just trying to live normal lives. The victims of the previous carjackings felt relieved knowing that their attackers had been caught and would spend many years in prison. Several of them attended the sentencing hearing to see justice being served. Marcus sometimes thought about Tommy, Jake, and Steve, and wondered if their lives could have turned out differently if they had made better choices. He knew that crime usually started with small bad decisions that led to bigger ones, and he hoped that other young people could learn from their mistakes. 5 years later, Jake Patterson was released early for good behavior and went to work for a program that helped other young men avoid getting involved in crime. Tommy Rodriguez was still in prison, but he had earned his high school diploma and was learning job skills that he hoped would help him find honest work when he got out. Steve Mitchell continued to get in trouble even while he was in prison and had years added to his sentence for fighting with other inmates. Some people never learned from their mistakes, no matter how many chances they were given.